In today's React Native School lesson, we're going to be taking a look at styled components. If you've worked with React, you may have used this library before. It's an alternative way to actually creating styled components, as the name may suggest. It allows us to write CSS and basically build components. Best way I found is to learn by coding, so let's go ahead and dive in. The first thing you'll want to do is add styled components to your npm packages or your node modules via yarn or npm. Once that's complete, we can go ahead and start using it. Basically, the way you're going to use styled components is replacing anything you would use a style sheet and styles for is going to now be a styled component. So I'll start by importing styled from styled-components, and since this is React Native, we'll do /native. Now with styled components, you're actually writing CSS rather than CSS and JS. So what I'm going to do is say const container is equal to a styled.view, and then we're going to use backticks for template literals, and inside of here is where we actually write our CSS. So since this is real CSS, we're going to say flex :1 with a semicolon at the end. We'll also use a background dash color. We'll set the color for that. There's no string around this, again ending with a semicolon, and we'll set a justify content to be flex dash end. Now I'm not used to writing normal CSS, so I'll probably be making a handful of mistakes of adding quotation marks around various properties, but since we are using string interpolation here or template literals, you don't actually have to do that. So to use this component, we'll go ahead, take container, and I'll find the view that's actually using styles.container. Now we can just go ahead and replace it. I'll go down and make sure we've updated the bottom as well. So now if we save this and it refreshes, everything looks exactly the same. Likewise, we can do the same thing for our value text. We'll set this to a styled.text. And you can see that's the pattern. We're going to use styled.text, and since we are using styled component /native, that text is available to us. We can go ahead and set the properties. And with those complete, we can go ahead and replace our text style with styles.value to be our value text. And as you can see, it looks exactly the same. By the way, this example is from my course React Native by Example. I'm going to have a link to where you can get all of this code for this example once we're done down in the description. But since that's completed, we can go ahead and delete this styles object, and we can delete all of these components as well. So now we've got these container components, value text, and you can see they're very much compartmentalized. The styles are right where we define the components, and it's just a normal component we can use. Great thing about this is, one, it's very clear what the styles relate to, and two, we can reuse these in different spots if we so desire because it is a component. It's not just a style object. Now let's go ahead and actually do more complex examples. So basically all of these buttons, if we scroll down, you can see they're all the exact same button component. They just have different props. They have different themes and they have different sizes. Okay, and basically that's going to go ahead and change the actual button color as well as the text color. Now this component is in app/component/button.js. Again, we're going to be importing our styled from styled-components/native. And if we scroll down, let's look at what we've got. We've got a touchable opacity, which surrounds a text input. That text and the button can actually be changed based off of props from theme as well as size. So let's go ahead and do this text component first, and then we'll come back and do the touchable opacity. So let's create a new styled text that we'll call button text. And that's going to equal styled.text. We'll use those backticks, and then we can go ahead and start assigning our styles. If we scroll up, you can see we've got text styles, which has a styles of text by default. So we know it's got a color and a font size. We'll go ahead and convert this to normal CSS. Okay, and then to use this button text, we'll just go ahead and replace our text down here with button text. Now it renders similarly, but you can see we're not changing the text color dynamically. To go ahead and do that, the first thing we need to do is here we've got our text styles. We're going to go ahead and basically pass the property that we're doing the computation based off of. And in this case, it's theme. So we'll pass theme equal to theme down to our button text component. And then inside of our button text, basically when we have a secondary theme, we're going to go ahead and use styles.textSecondary, which just changes the color of the text. So what we can do is actually down in our button text, since we're doing template literals or string interpolation here, we can actually do computations in it by using the $ curly braces to pass dynamic variables in there. And something that style components is doing is allowing us to access the props from within each one of these properties. So we can access a function called props, or a function that's going to be passed the argument of props. And from in here, we know we've got a props.theme. If props.theme is equal to secondary, then we're going to return the 060606 color. Otherwise, we'll just go ahead and return our typical white. So if I save this now, you can see we've got the white text in our normal buttons, and then we've got black text here in our secondary buttons. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for the actual button. This time though, it's a bit more complex, but we'll build up on it incrementally. So first off, let's just do our base button. So we'll create a new button that's going to equal a style.touchable opacity. And if we go, we know our default style button style is just styles.button. So we'll just go ahead and copy all of these properties. We'll paste these in here and convert them to normal CSS. First off is the semicolons. Then we need to change the camel casing to just dashes. And something that's nice about style components is if you are making this transition and you're like me and you're not used to writing typical CSS anymore, it's got different integrations with different browsers, like I've got it in Visual Studio Code here to kind of point out where some of these issues are. So I think I've changed everything. Now, a few things here. We can see I'm doing a computation here, math.floor. Just like up here, what I'm going to do is put a $ curly brace around that. And just rather than doing a computation here based off props, I'm just passing my math.floor button width -10. I'll do the same thing for our border radius. And now if I go ahead and use this button, and all I'll do is replace touchable opacity with our button, I'm still going to pass onPress to it, but I no longer need to pass style to it. I'll see I've got a failed to parse declaration margin 10, or margin 5. Basically, like I said, this is CSS, so we need to define things in the same way we would define CSS. The way this works is you've actually got to specify units because it does support different units. We need to add 5 pixels, even though pixels don't necessarily exist within the context of React Native. But that's just a caveat of working with styled components, which also works on the web. Another error I've got here is I put quotes around my centers, so we'll remove those, refresh it, and now we've got our buttons back. You can see though we don't have our styles. Looking down here at our themes, we see that we've got our secondary style, which is going to change. We've either got a secondary or an accent color, and if we look at those, button secondary and button accent, we're just changing our background color. So just like our button text, for our background color, we'll go ahead and make that dynamic. To do that, we'll use the curly braces. And in here, we'll access our props, which can be a function. It doesn't have to all be on one line. I'm going to use a switch in which we'll look at the props.theme. And we've got 3 cases. We've got a case of secondary, a case of accent, and then we'll have a default case. Our default is just going to be the 33333. And since we're in a function, we actually do need to wrap this in the quotation marks. Okay, and then we can do the same for our accent colors. our other themes. So we've got our secondary. Let's do the accent color. And it's not changing. The reason it's not changing is we haven't passed the theme down to our button. So I'll go ahead and pass theme as a prop. And now we've got those different colors. We're just about done. The only problem is this 0 should be taking up more space than it is. And that's going to be when the size is equal to double, we've got this button double. Now button double, as you can see down here, basically we're stacking our styles. We're combining styles. We've got styles.button as the base. We'll add on button double, then we can add on our different background colors. We've got the dynamic background colors, but the double button is going to be a bit more comprehensive. And rather than having to redefine all of this, we want to continue to kind of stack styles on top of each other. So what we can do to actually accomplish that with styled components is we can go ahead and create a new component. We're going to call this const button double. Okay, and that's going to equal styled. And rather than saying style.touchable opacity, it's going to be a function in which we pass the base component we want to work on, and that's button. So it's going to go ahead, create a styled touchable opacity with all of these styles, and then we can go ahead and start overriding different properties. And in this case, if we go up to button double, we can go ahead and copy all these properties. And we need to go ahead and just make this normal CSS. Now, to use the correct button, what I'm going to do is down in the actual component that I'm exporting is I'll delete all these styles because we no longer need them. And instead of using button directly, I'm going to create a new component called button comp, button comp, or button component. And in here, I'll say if the size is equal to double, then use the button double component. Otherwise, use the normal button. And then we'll go ahead and replace button down here with button comp. And you can see things look different, but they're not quite right. This is another caveat with styled components, or it's almost like a benefit because Flex is actually working the way you would expect it to coming from the web. If you don't know, React Native has kind of a weird implementation of Flex 1. It's not what you would expect it to be. But with styled components, it's what you expect it to be. It's the actual real spec for Flex. So this is a kind of a benefit, but if you're coming from a long time with React Native like I am, it's a bit different. So basically, to accomplish the same thing, you might need to tinker around. For me, I need to set flex shrink to 0, and I need to make sure I add that R. And here you can see we've actually got those styles. So if I go through and actually delete the code that we're no longer using, again, we've got that benefit of clearly defined components which we can reuse as we saw down here. This is actually a few lines less code. I'm not big on counting lines, but maybe you are. This is just a different way of styling in React Native, which I've found beneficial. I haven't used this in production yet, but I'm considering kind of toying with this a little bit more just to make some of my more simple components more reusable in different spots. So to wrap up, a few pros of using styled components. One, you're writing real CSS here. It's background dash color, not background capital C color. So people coming from the web are going to be more familiar with it. They're going to be able to more easily write things. Like I've been saying, you've got very clearly defined components, not just style objects that you have to import, use in different places. These are actual components that you're building with. If you look at the documentation, there's a bunch of advanced functionality like using proper themes, not these kind of fake themes I've got set up. And I think that's a really, really powerful thing, especially as we're moving more towards applications that have both a light mode and a dark mode. And then finally, you can mix this code really easily with your existing code. It's not like a big transition you have to make. You can easily just start playing around with it a little bit. As you saw here, we did this migration, but you can just do one component at a time, or you can just start building that next component with styled components to see how you like it. Now, the one big con that I've found, and this might just be my background personally, is I find styled components to be a little bit more verbose than I'm used to, but I think that's just a familiarization thing. As you get more familiar with it, it'll get more and more normal and feel right. So I hope you found that lesson useful. Definitely check out styled component. Kind of the startup cost is really, really low, and it could bring some nice processes into your design system in your application.